Hello, I am Sheila May Reyes, a first-year college student taking Bachelor of Secondary in Education here in San Carlos College. So today, I am going to discuss the analysis of selected primary sources in readings in Philippine history. So let's start. So what are the primary sources in the Philippine history? What are they? So, primary sources are usually defined as first-hand information or data that is generated by witnesses or participants in the past events. These are characterized not by their format but rather by the information they convey and their relationship to the research question. This includes letters, diaries, journals, newspapers, photographs, and other immediate accounts that interprets or evaluates of these sources becomes the basis of research. So primary sources enables the researcher to get as close as possible to what actually happened during an historical event or time period. So, here are the example of primary sources. Example are diaries and journals. Example, Anne Frank was a teenager during World War II. She kept a diary or journal the years before she died in a concentration camp. Her diary was later published as the Diary of Anne Frank. This is an example of primary source. Another example is Sarah Morgan Dawson, who was a young woman during the Civil War. She wrote in her diary or journal what happened to her and her family during the war. This is an example of primary document because it was first-hand. She wrote it at the time it happened, and the diary titled as A Confederate Girl's Diary. So, example number 2. The autobiographies are example also of primary source because autobiography is when you write a story or book about yourself, means it is first-hand experience. So example, if you are familiar with Nelson Mandela, who wrote his autobiography about events in his life called Long Walk to Freedom. This is a primary document because he wrote his first-hand experiences. Then, another example is the sound recordings and interviews are considered primary sources. Why? Because during the Great Depression and World War II, television had not been invented yet, so the people would often sit around the radio to listen to President Roosevelt's war messages. Those radio addresses are considered primary sources. So that is the example of primary source. The sound recording and the interviews. Another example is during the 2008 election, Barack Obama had many interviews that were televised. Those interviews are considered primary sources. So, why use primary sources? Why use primary sources? Why we are using primary sources? So here are the advantages and disadvantages of primary sources. So let's take first the advantages of primary sources. So, it provides a window into the past or unfiltered access to the record of artistic, social, scientific, and political thought and achievement during the specific period under study, produced by people who lived during that period. So these unique, often profoundly personal documents and objects can give a very real sense of what it was like to be alive during a long past era. So disadvantages of primary sources are often incomplete and have little context. Students must use prior knowledge and work with multiple primary sources to find patterns. So in analyzing primary sources, students move from concrete observations and facts to questioning and making inferences about the materials. So, how to analyze primary sources? So it can evaluated by the different criteria such as content analysis and contextual analysis of selected primary sources in Philippine history. So first, let's familiarize oneself with the primary documents in different historical period of the Philippines. Second, earn history through sources. And third, properly interpret and understand the primary sources through examining the content and context of the documents. So, what is content analysis? Let's take a look at this. It is a method for studying primary sources such as documents and communication artifacts, which can be texts or various formats, pictures, audio, or video. So that is the example of the content analysis. We're looking for various formats, pictures, audio, or video. That is our main method for studying primary sources in content of analysis. So next, we have the contextual analysis, or what we call textual analysis. So this is the understanding the historical context of a primary source that is critical for understanding the attitudes and influences that shape the creation of the primary source. If not placed into historical context, a primary source or a true meaning might be misinterpreted. So we should take a look in this contextual analysis, because if we were not placed into a historical context, our document will be misinterpreted. So, what is the importance of content and contextual analysis of selected primary sources? What are they? So, first, to learn history through primary sources. Of course, we learn history through these primary sources. We can know what happened in the past, and we can apply it to the future or to the present, so that we can learn it. So, second, to properly interpret primary sources through examining and context of the document. So, we could now interpret the primary sources through the content and context of the document, or the context of the document. So third, to understand the context behind each selected document. The historian's primary tool of understanding and interpreting the past is the historical sources. So that's it. Historical sources. We are looking for historical sources that might help us to understand the context of the document. So, many documents of historical importance produced today, such as personal letters, pictures, contracts, newspapers, and medical records, would be considered valuable historical documents that will survive the passage of time. So, and the main goal of carefully examining the primary sources is to construct new knowledge, or to use the information or document sample to explore broader historical issues or contexts. So, how to learn through primary sources? Any idea? No? None? Okay. Basically, through experiences and learnings, we earn knowledge that develop our skills. Through asking questions, thinking critically that develop reasoned explanations, promotes a deeper understanding of history. We can apply primary sources in our life situation that will adapt our analysis on learning more the documents, events in primary sources. So, second, how to properly interpret primary sources through examining the content and context of the documents. How we are going to do that? So, through this analysis, It will properly interpreted in understanding the historical context of a primary source. The context analysis is where the source comes from, who, when, and why it was produced. It's the background of the event. That is, on the other hand, content analysis in summarizing any form of content to identify the appreciation of the complexity of the source that is logical so that knowledge of a person will be based on the truth. It's always in the truth. Primary sources should be truth only. So, lastly, how to familiarize oneself with the primary documents in different historical periods of the Philippines. So, familiarizing these primary sources are something to do with the fact that can be looked at the truth basis. In order to familiarize, developing the analytical abilities in finding and seeking of documents that is reliable and trustworthy. Also, to look evidences that would benefit the researcher and the reader. Interpreting the primary documents while knowledgeable will help it to exercise different historic events. So, that's all. That's the analysis of selected primary sources in readings in Philippine history. So I hope you learned something, and thank you.